With Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Lamed Hey. We left off yesterday Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis. I think it is 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Omar Shmuel. In our Mishnah, as the Gemara clarified the case, referring to the case of Huchlefu, where 2 men, it might have been their 2 brothers, who got married to 2 sisters, by accident, b'shoigeg, b'shas, knisas, and l'chupa, exchanged the wives, and after they realized the mistake that they made, being that the Mishnah is speaking about husbands that are Yisraelim, which will be permitted to go back to be with their wives, because their wife's relation with another man was not willingly, was b'shoigeg. Nevertheless, the Mishnah taught us the din of havchana, that one has to wait for 3 months, because being that most women who are pregnant have the pregnancies recognizable after 3 months, so we want to make sure that we know if this woman is pregnant from that illicit, even though it was b'shoigeg, by accident, we want to know if she got pregnant from that or not. In our Mishnah, if she would have gotten pregnant from the relation that she had as a married woman with another man, that child will be a mamzer. And we need to know that. The ardinim, a mamzer cannot marry into the Jewish community. A married can only mamzer a mamzeres, or a giyoires. Says Shmuel, that this din of havchana, of having to wait, you should know, isn't only in the case of our Mishnah, but vikulan, all times where there is a doubt, as the Gemara is going to clarify, when a woman had a relation with another man prior her marriage, we need to wait for her to be with her current husband 3 months to make sure we know from who is the child. And as we explained when we learned the Mishnah, that even though one can argue, well, whenever the baby is born, go back 9 months and you'll know who the father was. To that we respond that in the Gemara we have a concept of a pregnancy that only lasts for 7 months. So knowing the date of birth will only put the question mark, is it a birth which is from a 7th month pregnancy? In other words, from a man who had a relation with her at a later date, or perhaps is it from the man who had a relation with her in a prior date and it's a 9th month pregnancy? So you have to have avchana v'kulan in all cases. Chutz, there's only one exception according to this version of what Shmuel said. A giyoides, a woman who converted, or mishochredes, or a woman that was a Canaanite, a non-Jewish maidservant, and she's being emancipated, and her emancipation is her becoming Jewish, because in those days when people used to own slaves, the slaves went to the mikveh, they already took upon themselves to keep the mitzvahs, they were already obligated to a certain degree in keeping of the mitzvahs, but they were not full-fledged Jews. Jewish men or Jewish women. But if they were free, they become Yidden. So if the Giyoides or the Mishruchredes either converted or got emancipated while she is a Ketana, that's the only exception that Shmuel said. She does not have to wait 3 months if she's getting married right after she converted. And why is that? Explained in the Rishonim, as we'll see in Rashi in Daf Lamed Hey Yomad Aleph, that a giyoides or a mishochredes ketana is something unusual, and therefore as follows: other minor girls, even though a ketana cannot become pregnant, as we learned before, nevertheless the Chachamim made a decree. It's called gazru ketana atu gedola, being that if an adult woman has a relation with another man, or perhaps had a relation with another man, we don't know that, and now she wants to get married, we make her wait 3 months. So the same thing is also if you have a minor. A minor cannot become pregnant, you're geyser ketana otu gedayla. But when it comes to a giyoides or mishochredes, such a scenario of a minor converting either from being a goya to a Jew, or from being a maid servant, becoming emancipated to something unusual. So in an unusual case, the Chachamim did not make the Gezeira Ketana Atu Gedoyla. And by a Ketana B'chlal, we're not afraid that she's pregnant, because Ketanos do not get pregnant. Aval implies the Gemara, seemingly, according to this version, if the Ketana is a Bas Yisrael, if the minor is a Jewish woman, and she had a relation with another man, as we'll see in a moment, perhaps she was married before, and she gets divorced, then she does have to wait for 3 months. So ask the Gemara, B'mai, how did she have a relation as a Ketana with one man, who is now getting married with another man? If we're speaking about a minor who only had a rabbinic marriage, as we explained already many times, that if a minor girl is a orphan, even though by the Torah law her father has the right to marry her off, and that marriage is a biblical marriage, but if her father dies, then no one else could marry her off. But midrabanan, her mother or her older brother could marry her off. And there are other cases as well. Such a marriage is called a rabbinic marriage. And being that it's only a rabbinic marriage, she can get out of the marriage by simply going in front of 2 or 3 people and refusing to be married to her husband. And if she does that, that's called miyun, and the marriage is severed. So if we're speaking about a case of miyun, in other words, you have a Ketana Bas Yisrael who did miyun with her original husband, and now she's getting married to a new man. And in this case, Shmuel is telling you she has to wait. Only the Giyaris doesn't have to wait, but the Ketana does have to wait. That can't be correct, because Shmuel himself said that in a case of miyun deloi bai, that in such a scenario, this minor does not have to wait. Again, don't forget that a minor girl cannot become pregnant. So the real need, the real chashash of we won't know who fathered the child, here there's not a case of mamzerus, here it's just a case of yichus. Who's the dad? We're not worried about that because she will not have a child as a minor. But normally you make a decree, gezerah, ketana atu gedolah. In the case of miyun, we do not make such a decree because there is no such a thing as miyun by a gedolah. The idea of refusing a marriage, thus nullifying it, is only in a case where there's a rabbinic marriage. That rabbinic marriage, even if the mother or brother married her off, if as a gdoila, if when she turns 12 she stays with that husband, automatically the marriage becomes a Torah marriage. And if she wants out, she needs to get a get like any other married woman. So being that the case of miyun does not exist by a gdoila, the rabbis didn't make the decree ketana atu gdoila. Elo v'i beget, the first, right, the wide lines in the bottom, second to last line, v'i beget, and if Shmuel is trying to exclude a girl who's a ketana, who, let's say, who her father married her off, and therefore she needs a get, and after the get, she has to wait 3 months. Shmuel already said that. Shmuel already said, as it's recorded in Ksubas, that in a case of miyun, you don't need 3 months of hafchana, nasan laget, tzricha lahamtin shleisha chadashim. And therefore the question is, what was Shmuel excluding? V'kulan tzricha, who is he referring to? V'kulan. The only exclusion is the giyaris ketana. But who is he excluding? Whatever he's excluding, l'chayda was already spoken about. So the Gemara clarifies, ela biznus. He's excluding a girl, either a ketana or a gedolah, that's a Jewish girl, that if she had a relation out of wedlock with a man, and now she's getting married, so Shmuel is telling you that the din of our Mishnah was speaking about people who accidentally exchanged wives. Says Shmuel, that was just a case of the Mishnah, but the din of the Mishnah, v'kulan, that whenever a woman has a relation with another man, if she wants to get married now, she has to wait 3 months, even by a ketana. As we said, a ketana does not become pregnant, right? V'gozru daf lamed hey amud aleph on the top. V'gozru rabbanan ketana mishum gedolah. Okay, that's this version. Why did the Gemara bring in Shmuel? Because right now we're going to ask against Shmuel from our Mishnah. We're going to try to refute Shmuel. Frek the Gemara, umi gozrin ketana mishum gedolah. How do you say that a Jewess who's a ketana, who had a relation with another man, she has to wait 3 months? Even though she will not become pregnant, but the Chachamim made across the board loy plug. Gazru ketana atu gedolah. V'tanan, we learned in our Mishnah that im hay ketana is that if the case in our Mishnah where the brothers exchanged their sisters, each one had a relation accidentally with the other man's, with their brother's wife. She'einam ru'uyim leila. It says the Mishnah that if that happened when the wives were minors, then machzirin oisan miyad, then they can right away go back to their husbands. According to this version, Shmuel is saying that by a Jewish girl by birth, Even if she's a ketana, you have to have havchana, and you have to wait 3 months. Our Mishnah says you don't. So to this, Amar Rav Gidl, Amar Rav, that from our case in the Mishnah, it's not a question, because Hoyra'as Sha'a Hoysa. Hoyra'as Sha'a are words that are normally used when a certain scenario comes up, and a person who has Nevius, or at least Ruach HaKodesh, knows that only in this time, only in this case, something could be done which is unusual, which is normally not the rulings of the Torah. The words Hoyra'as Sha'a is even used, like for example by Eliyahu HaNavi, when he was challenging the prophets of the idol of Baal by building a Mizbeach on Har HaKarmel. Even though a Mizbeach can only be built in the place of the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, and normally if any person comes and says that God came to them and told them to do something that goes against even a hairbreadth of the Torah, that itself proves that that prophet is a false prophet. But if the prophet is saying to do something only as a one-time thing, we accept it. But this word is borrowed from prophecy, but it means that this was an exception. In other words, really a ketana it has to wait, because gazru ketana atu gedayla. In our Mishnah, where 2 men exchanged, when they went into the chuppah, they had a relation with someone else's kala. That's very unusual. That's the only case where the Chachamim there said, just like by a giyoris, which is something which is not shchiach, loy gazru ketana atu gedayla, neither in the case of the Mishnah. The only problem is that when the Gemara uses the words Hoyra'as Sha'a, which means that case happened, and they asked a big Tana, right? The Mishnah speaks about it, and a Tana says, in this case, they can right away go back to their husbands. Whenever the Mishnah speaks about an actual event, the Mishnah begins with the words Maisa. Many times. The Mishnah says, a story happened. This Mishnah didn't begin by teaching this law as if something happened once. It was teaching the din the way he teaches most din. It sounds like it happened. It should have said Maisa. Answers the Gemara, it didn't really happen. The Mishnah is saying that if something like this happened, it's so rare that it's only like a one-time case. And again, it's a davar shelo shchiach, and therefore v'chiluf lo shchiach. And even though Shmuel normally holds, according to this version, that a Jewish ketana who has a relation with another man needs to wait 3 months before she marries, even though a ketana will never get pregnant, but since by an adult you have to have this 3 months wait to know who the father is, so you say, if you do it by an adult, do it by a minor. By a Yiddish minor, we do that, unless there's something very unusual, there we can make an exception. Okay. Lishnachrina, there's another version in what Shmuel said. That Lishnachrina Amrila. There was another version that said that Amar Shmuel said, Kulam Srichais Lahamtin. That this din of Havchana, Daf Lamed Hey on the top, of waiting 3 months, exists by all women, aside, look at this, a Giyoris or Mishuchreres Gedoyla, aside of an adult convert, that if she converts as an adult, even though an adult woman could become pregnant, and you would argue, if she just converted right now, tell her to wait 3 months before she gets married, because maybe she had a relation with a non-Jew before she converted. And now she'll get married right after she converts, she'll marry a Jewish man. After a few months, people are going to know that she's pregnant. We really won't know who the father is. And it's important to know Yichus, who the father is. So you would think that you would make them wait. So Shmuel comes with the Chiddush, and he says that even if she's an adult, she doesn't have to wait. Avol Ketana, implying, if that's what Shmuel said, that if she would be a minor, even if she's a Bas Yisrael, she does not need to wait 3 months. And now the Gemara quotes the statement that Shmuel said, that's written in Ksubas again. 1 second, B'mai. When would Shmuel imply that a Jewish ketana never needs to wait? Shmuel already taught you that. If there was a minor Jewish woman who got married by her father and she got divorced and now she wants to remarry, are you telling me that Shmuel is saying that she doesn't have to wait? It can be. Shmuel himself said, that she does have to wait. Shmuel says, however, Nasan lo get, then she does have to wait Shleisha Chadash. So answers the Gemara, when does Shmuel say that a minor girl, a Jewish girl, does not have to wait 3 months, that if she was mizana, that means if she had a relation out of wedlock with a man, with a Jewish man, and now she's getting married, there Shmuel says she does not have to wait. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Don't forget, a ketana does not get pregnant. The only reason why you would say a ketana would need to wait is because, the rabbis, they made a decree across the board, gazru ketana atu gedola. They didn't say it, but we'll see soon why. And znus b'ktana lo yishchiach. Being that znus b'ktana lo yishchiach, legazer b'ravanan. So if the girl is married as a minor, even though she will not get pregnant, the rabbi says, since by an adult you have to wait, a minor has to wait. But znus b'ktana lo yishchiach, legazer b'ravanan. However, why did Shmuel say that an adult convert does not need to wait? That was his exception. The shchiach behul znus, they are adults, and for them it's more common to have a relation out of wedlock. So Ligzler, the rabbis should have decreed that they also have to wait. Answers the Gemara, who? Shmuel, the Amar ke Rabbi Yosi. He says, he holds like Rabbi Yosi. As we'll see in a moment, he doesn't paskin exactly like Rabbi Yosi. If that would have been the case, you know what Shmuel would have said? Halacha ke Rabbi Yosi. Shmuel changes from Rabbi Yosi. Part of what Rabbi Yosi says, Shmuel agrees to. We'll see that Rabbi Yosi goes even further than Shmuel. Which Rabbi Yosi? The Tanya. Right, we learned, he writes in Ksubas, Abraisa, Hagiyotis, if a woman converted, or Vahashavuya, or if a woman, God forbid, was kidnapped by non-Jews, and then we redeemed her, or Vahashivcha, or a maidservant that was kidnapped, and Shenivdu, or Vishenizgairu, or Vishenishtachraru, they were either redeemed, or they converted, or they were emancipated. In other words, there was a time that they were amongst non-Jews, and there's a possibility that they were raped, or they were seduced. Rabbi Yehuda says, no matter if they say they had a relation or not, the moment they are now free, they now converted, they are now emancipated, you make them wait 3 months. This concept of, we need to know who the father is, and even if she'll get pregnant and you'll track back the date, you can always argue that the baby comes from the second husband, from the latter husband, and it's a 7-month-old baby. However, Rabbi Yosi mater le'ores ulhinose miyad. Rabbi Yosi holds that in all of these cases, they can right away get engaged and get married. And Amar Rabba, my Tamad Rabbi Yosi. Because Kosova, Rabbi Yosi holds, Isha mizana, that if a woman has a relation out of marriage, mishameshes b'moich, she puts some type of birth control, we learned about this before in Daf Yud Beis, she puts in some type of, what we call today a diaphragm, some type of wad, some type of cloth, inside the place where, in Makem HaTashmish, in order for that to absorb the sperm, for her not to get pregnant. Kedei shalei tzasaber. And therefore, she will not get pregnant from a relation out of wedlock, so there's nothing to worry about. See, in our Mishnah, the Mishnah was that each man thought he's marrying his wife. Each woman thought she is with her husband. She was not Meshamish b'moich. There's a fear she got pregnant. So now that you discovered a terrible mistake, you make them wait 3 months. If a woman is married, Kedas Kedin, and she gets divorced, you tell her wait 3 months? Because when she was married with the first husband, the union was kosher. She was not afraid not to get pregnant. But out of wedlock, she doesn't want to get pregnant. So Amalei Abaya asks Abaya to Rabba's explanation, your explanation works in the case of Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda when they're speaking about a convert. Kivan the daitali igayure, since she knew she was converting, it's a process. So therefore, mintra nafsha, even if she would have a relation with a man out of wedlock, she would be careful. She would be careful to use a moich, because she would not want to get pregnant. Even though if a woman gets pregnant and while she's pregnant she converts, first of all she can go to the mikveh, and that mikveh works even for the child, and we'll learn about these dinim later. People ask, 1 second, doesn't the convert have to go to the mikveh? Yes, but wasn't the woman, the mother, a chatzitza to the baby? And the Gemara is going to explain how that works, and it works. So it's not that she was afraid to get pregnant, but she herself would want to know if her child was conceived by a Jew after she's Jewish, or was it conceived by a non-Jew before she herself was Jewish. She would want to know that. And therefore she will prevent herself from getting pregnant. She would use what we would call today some type of birth control. Shavuya v'shivchanami, if a woman was, God forbid, kidnapped, or a maidservant, there are times that the shami mimorayu, that they hear from their masters that they are going to be emancipated, or they hear from their masters that people are negotiating their redemption. So they know that they will be free. They don't want to be freed pregnant. They don't want people to know that they had a relation with their captors. So therefore, if they would have a relation, they would use the moich, they would use birth control. They would make sure they don't get pregnant. Ella, but there is also a clause, since the Braisa there was a general statement, any woman who gets emancipated. Sometimes people are emancipated because if their master, God forbid, hits them and hurts them, damages, the words in the Gemara is, knocks out their eye or their tooth, or really as the din is, any of the 24 limbs. If a toe gets knocked out, if the ear gets knocked off, if a nose gets knocked off, what it's called shen va'ayin. These are the two examples the Torah gives. If a slave or a slave woman gets mutilated, they are automatically free. And if that happens, no one planned to do it to them. Which means that it's possible that someone got emancipated without any prior knowledge. Why would she protect herself by using a moich? In such a case, she did not know she's ever going to get freed. So that explanation wouldn't work. It says the Gemara v'chitema kol de b'meila moide Rabbi Yosi. And if you're going to say that enachanami, that if a woman gets freed automatically without prior knowledge, Rabbi Yosi will agree to Rabbi Yehuda that you need to wait. It's not true, because v'hatanan, or again v'hataya, we learned in a Mishnah or in a Braisa that anusa, a woman who was raped, or umefuta, a woman that was seduced, tzricha lahamten gimel chadashim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Right? A rape, that means she didn't know. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to wait 3 months, because maybe she got pregnant from that act of intimacy. Rabbi Yosi mater liyaris uli nasim miyad. You see clearly that even by anusa, even when a woman is raped, she did not know she's going to have a relation. Rabbi Yosi allows her to get married right away. The question is why? Answers the Gemara Elam Rabbi. Rabbi explains the reasons of Rabbi Yosi. Isha mizana. Whenever a woman has a relation out of wedlock, again, even if, God forbid, she was raped, I mean, she didn't know she's going to do it. Nevertheless, mishapeches, she inverts herself. That means right after the relation, she gets into a position that will make all of the zera, all of the semen immediately leave her body, and she knows what to do in order not to get pregnant. Shaloitis aber. So that's what Rabbi Yosi says, that any woman who has a relation out of wedlock will not get pregnant. She doesn't want to get pregnant. And she knows what to do after the relation without using birth control, even if she didn't prepare for it. Not to get pregnant, all that goes back to explaining why Shmuel says that if a woman is a giyoris, if a woman is a mishuchreres, even though she's an adult, says Shmuel, she does not have to wait. It's an exception, because if she had a relation before she converted, she would be the mishapeches, and she will not get pregnant. And if she won't get pregnant, let her get married right away. And v'idach. What about Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that in such cases, women do not want to get pregnant. And they can stand up in a way that all of the semen will leave their body, but it doesn't always work, says Rabbi Yehuda. That chayshin and shemelin is hapcha yafa yafa. She might not invert herself the way you need to, and she still might get pregnant. So Rabbi Yehuda holds, let's make a recap. The first version of Shmuel holds that Jewish women, right, always have to wait. If I'm not mistaken, the only exception to that would be if a Jewish ketana got miyun, right, Chaim? Being that miyun does not exist by an adult, that's the only case where she does not have to wait. The second version of Shmuel is that Jewish adults have to wait. And it doesn't matter whether they were married or even if they had an act of intimacy out of wedlock, Jewish adults have to wait between one and the other. According to Rabbi Yosi, he says even more. He says that only married women have to wait. It's by Shmuel, by Znus, out of wedlock, you have to wait. According to Rabbi Yosi, if a woman, a Jewish woman, an adult, gets married, if she was not married beforehand, she doesn't have to wait. Maybe she was mizana, maybe, but she won't get pregnant from that. So there's no need to wait. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, all women need to wait. All women always have to wait. It's important to make this recap because the whole next Pedic is, so to say, based on this din. General din. Women have to wait. I mentioned this, that when a woman today gets a get in a court, here, L'Kula Alma, you have to wait because she was married, kidin, to the first husband. They would notify her that she needs to wait for 90 days. I have to check, maybe it's 91 days, but she has to wait for this 3 months. And more than that, today the woman doesn't walk out with a get. The get is taken back by Beis Din, and they destroy it in a special way that no one else should be able to use the get, even if the man and the woman share the same exact names and they live in the same exact city. But the get has to be written for her, for him, for her, and for them. L'shem get. Having said that, the Beis Din gives them a document. The Beis Din will only give a divorced woman the document that she's divorced after these 90 days. So I guess she'll want to get married. If the rabbi who's marrying them half knows what he's doing, he'll ask them for documents. Who are you? Where are you from? Were you married? Are you Jewish? And if she'll say, I was married and divorced, he'll ask for the divorce document. And she won't be able to produce it. So he'll know that to ask and to figure out, you got to wait the 3 months. Now, just on the Gemara now is going to explain the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah was, V'im hoya koi hanois, that if the word koi hanois normally means if they are the daughters of Kahanim. If they are Bas Kahanim, over there the Mishnah says, then even though it was an accidental relation, nevertheless, the wordings in our Mishnah, according to the Gemara, was Nifsulu min ha kuhuna. They are disqualified from kuhuna. Even though that in our Mishnah it says Nifsulu min ha truma, and the Gemara is going to explain that it actually means Nifsulu min ha truma. But if the Gemara would have had the version that we have in our Mishnah, then it wouldn't have been a novelty to say that they're not good to eat truma. Our Mishnah had the version, as it says in the Rashal, in Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, that if these wives are the daughters of Kahanim, then they become pasul from Kuhuna. Now we have to clarify what that means. When does a married woman get to eat truma? When is she a kohuna? Or let's go better, before eating. A Jewish woman who had a relation with another man against her will or by accident is allowed to go back to her husband. What woman cannot go back to her husband if she had a relation with another man no matter what, even if God forbid she was raped, is only if she's married to a kohen. Now if you're married to a kohen, a Eishes kohen cannot be with her husband if she was raped, or here there was an accident, not only if she herself was a daughter of a kohen, even if she's a Yisraelis. So ask the Gemara, why does the Mishnah speak about a kohanos and a Yisraelis not? Even a Yisraelis that's married to a kohen, if two brothers were kahanim and they accidentally exchanged their wives, they cannot go back to their husbands because they're married to kahanim. So Enochanami corrects the Gemara, don't say kohanos, they are the daughters of kahanim, but it says the Mishnah means that if they are the wives of kahanim, they cannot go back to their husbands. If they would have been wives of Yisraelim, then they could go back to their husbands, but not if they're married to kahanim. But the Gemara is still not happy with that. Neshei kahanim in, neshei Yisraelim loy. If they are married to Yisraelim, then if they exchanged wives, then everything is fine. It's nishtamis. Rav Amram said that that Rav Sheshes taught us a law, and the anharinu la'ainin mimas nisan, and he enlightened our eyes from a Mishnah. We're not going to speak about this proof, but what was the bottom line? The proof, what he said is that a Eishes Yisrael, if a Yisrael is married to a woman, and shenensa, and if God forbid she was raped, even though now that she's married to a Yisraelis, to Yisrael, she can go back to him. Nevertheless, there is a pasuk from where we learn that if a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael, while she's married to him, she's no longer allowed to eat truma. If she becomes a widow from him, or if she gets divorced from him, can she go back to eating truma? So the pasuk says it depends. If she has a child from her Yisrael husband, even though she's divorced or widowed, she has a child from him, from a Yisrael, she can no longer eat truma. But if she got widowed or divorced and she has no children, then she could return to her father's house and eat truma. Says Rav Amram, if while she was married to the Yisrael, she was only with her husband. But if she was, God forbid, let's say she had a relation with another man, even if it was against her will, even though she was muteres to marry, to go back to her Yisrael husband, that yeah. But if her husband would have been a kohen, what would have been the din? She would have to get a divorce from him. That means that act separates her from her husband, from kahuna. So if her husband dies, she cannot go back to her father's house, and she cannot eat trumah. And therefore, Amar Rava, now Rava will explain the meaning of the Mishnah, that im hoya kahanois, exactly, if she is a bas kohen, and she's married to a Yisrael, and there was huchlafu, which means she had a relation with her husband's brother or with another man, even though it was not knowingly, this marriage is kosher. Her husband is a Yisrael. But if her husband dies, she's a kaihanois, she cannot go back to eat truma. Nifsulu min truma, the bein noshayu. She cannot go back to her maiden's home and eat truma because while she was married true to a Yisrael, she had a relation with another man.
Well, a bat kohen is married to herself, can she eat truma?
Well, a bas kohen,
she's married to a Israel.
no, she cannot eat truma. But if she gets a divorce from him, or if he dies and she has no children from him, then she could. However, if during that marriage to a Yisrael she had a relation with another man, even if it was a relation that did not disqualify her, then marriage, it disqualifies her from returning to her father's home, even if there's no children. And that's what the Mishnah means. Just to know that this is one of the hardest parakim in the whole Shas. So Hadan Alach means that we will return to you. Arba Achim. We're not happy that it's over, but we're happy that we're learning. We're moving on. Daf Lamed Hey Amud Bey is the new Mishnah. Okay, now that we just learned the din of Havchana, just to recap it, that when a man is married to a woman, according to everyone, even according to Rabbi Yossi, if there's a marriage, the woman won't be she's not going to try to prevent herself from getting pregnant, and she gets divorced. She has to wait 90 days before she marries again, because she already might be pregnant. It takes normally 90 days for there to be hukar ubra, to see that she's pregnant. She'll get married to her new husband, and even if later the baby will be born after 7 months, people are going to say, the baby was born only after 7 months from the new marriage. It must have been from the first marriage, lav dafka. There's a possibility that a pregnancy itself will only be a zayin, a 7-month pregnancy, like Moshe Rabbeinu and others. So therefore you have to wait. Now let's apply that din over here by Yibum. When a man is married to his wife, let's say Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven's brothers are not allowed to be with Rachel because of Eishes Ach. Aside of it being a Eishes Ish, but she's also the brother's wife. There's one exception, that if Reuven dies, and he died childless, without children, then there's a mitzvah of Yibum. But 1 second, now let's put these dinim together. When Reuven dies, children they don't have. Maybe she's pregnant. So really, before any of the brothers do Yibum or Chalitza, you have to wait 90 days. Question is, what happens if Yibum or Chalitza, let's begin with Chalitza, happened within the 90 days? So let's say Shimon did Chalitza. When he did Chalitza, he shouldn't have done it, because he needed to wait. Let's say we discover after 90 days passed that Enachanami, she was not pregnant. If she was not pregnant, that means she needed Chalitza. Was the Chalitza good or not? That's what we're going to learn over here. Same thing with Yibum. Imagine if Shimon does Yibum, and then we discover, no, she's pregnant. Now, if we discover she's pregnant, that means that the Yibum that Shimon did with her was a Yisra Kodesh, Eishes Ach. Which means the child will be a mamzer. Don't forget, a union that is prohibited with the penalty of Kodesh, if that, God forbid, produces a child, the child is a mamzer with one exception. The only union that's asur b'kares, that doesn't produce a mamzer, is with a nida, with one's wife who's a nida. It's a big aveda, but it doesn't make a mamzer. But let's read inside the Mishnah.
Find out before, you find out after that she's pregnant.
Let's go work this out. The Mishnah will work out, you're finding out before both ways by Chalitza and the Mayibum, and it's a very, compared to the previous Perek, it's easy. Let's go. Let's leave him to a man, Shimon, he did Chalitza to Rachel, to Reuven's, his brother's widow. And then, V'nimtzas me'uberes. Then, no, he did Chalitza within the 90 days, or the way Tosfos says, within or without, and she's pregnant, and she gives birth. Now we have to add one more thing. If a woman gives birth and the baby either, God forbid, dies during birth, that's not called a child. Even if it lived during the birth but it died within the first 30 days, we say that if it died within the first 30 days, it was lechatchila, not a viable pregnancy. So in such a case, retroactively we would say, she needs to do yibum or chalitza, because there's no child. But if she was pregnant and she gave birth, Bizman shehavlat shel chayom, and the baby lives, which means she never needed chalitza. Now we learned before a whole bunch of dinim. What happens to a woman who gets chalitza? None of those dinim are going to apply to her. So for example, who muter b'krei v'isel? There is a din that's called, we learned this together, achois chalutzasoi, which means that if a man divorces his wife, min doiraisa, he can never marry her sisters, right? Your wife's sisters, even though you divorced her. Midrabanan, when a man does chalitza to one woman, he can never marry her sisters. Over here, Shimon did chalitza to Rachel, but now that we discovered that chalitza was not needed, so he could now marry her sisters. Another din. There's a din that the woman that got chalitza, midrabanan, cannot marry that man's brothers. It's the one who did chalitza, the chalutz and the chalutza, they cannot marry each other's relatives. Midrabanan. Here they could, because the chalitza was nothing. Another din. Midoeraisa, a gerusha can never marry a kohen. Midrabanan, a chalutza cannot marry a kohen. A widow can marry a kohen. But a woman who needed to get chalitza, midrabanan, she's like a gerusha, she can't marry a kohen. So now this, Rachel married, Reuven married Rachel, Reuven dies, Shimon did chalitza. Now we discovered that the chalitza was not needed because she gave birth to a viable child, which means that Rachel is not a chalutza, she can marry a kohen. However, in reverse, ein havlat shel kayama, but if either she wasn't pregnant, or she was pregnant but the baby died during birth, or died within the 30 days of birth, which means the chalitza was needed. Now you did the chalitza at a time that you shouldn't have done it, because you didn't know if it's needed. But now that you retroactively know the chalitza is a chalitza, so she becomes a full-fledged chalutza with these three dinim. That hu asar b'krei v'seha, he can no longer marry her sisters, she cannot marry his relatives. And when I say he cannot marry her sisters, it's more than that. He cannot marry her sisters, he cannot marry her mother, he cannot marry her daughter. We'll learn more details later. So there are asr, each one is prohibited to marry midrabanan, the other person's close relatives, and she's a woman that has chalitza, and upsula min akuna, or psala min akuna. Now, let's go to the case of yibum, which is a lot more serious. See, by chalitza, if she didn't need it, the act of chalitza wasn't a sinful act. It was an unnecessary act. By yibum, it's worse. Right, Reuven dies, he leaves Rachel. What happens if Shimon decides to do yibum, and he doesn't wait the 90 days? So says the Mishnah, HaKoine says Yevimta, if a man does yibum, and now when nimtzeis meuberes v'yolada, now God forbid he discovers she is already pregnant and she gave birth to a viable child, which means there was no obligation of yibum, which means she's an erva of eishes ach. Bizman shavlat shel kayama yoitzi. Yoitzi means they cannot be together, you don't even need a get. Why don't you even need a get? Because whenever Hashem says not to have a union with the penalty of kares, ain't kiddushin toifsim. There's no kiddushin. So even though yibum normally is the act of kiddushin, halachically, the yibum wasn't a yibum. It was a man having a prohibited relation with eishes ach, so they cannot be together without it. You don't even need a get. And the chayavim b'karban, they have to bring a carbon. Obviously, as the Tosfos points out, he did yibum within the 3 months. If he did yibum after 3 months, when hukar ubra, then it's like a mazid. A carbon is brought for a sin that one does b'shoigig. Here it was a sin, kares, b'mezit. It was done b'shoigig. He didn't know. He thought he's doing a mitzvah, but he should have waited the 90 days. Now, we reverse v'im ein v'lat shel kayama. But if she wasn't pregnant, or even if she was pregnant and she gave birth, but the baby died within 30 days of birth, so then Yikayim, then Shimon can stay with her, because retroactively, while she was pregnant, they were saying, Oy Gewalt, we did a terrible thing. But now that the pregnancy turned out not to be viable, which means she is a woman that's standing for Yibum, so now the Yibum works. Yikayim. If he married her within the 90 days. Yeah. Now, Safek ben Tishel Rishon was something with Shiva Lachrain. Now, what happens in such a case that Shimon does Yibum? And early on in their marriage, she's pregnant. But you don't know, 1 second, how do you know it's in a case where we don't know if she's pregnant from her first husband. And therefore, the second Shimon is with her, Be'isur Kares. Maybe she's pregnant from Shimon. So the Mishnah says here, Yoitzi, you have a suffix, Mida Oiraisa. He has to separate from her. And here, obviously, you have to give a get. Why do you have to give a get? Because maybe she's pregnant from Shimon, which means that she was not pregnant from Reuven, which means the Yibum was a Yibum. So she's married. If you're going to say you can't be together, she can't be with another man without getting a get. But on the other hand, she can't stay with him because maybe she was pregnant from the first husband. The Havlad is kosher. Why is the Vlad kosher? The Vlad is not a mamzer. Why is that? The union was a prohibited union, perhaps. But if she was pregnant from Reuven, then who's the father of the child? Reuven. The relation between Reuven and Rachel was kosher. If the father of this child is Shimon, that means that when Reuven died, she was not pregnant. If she was not pregnant, then the marriage of Shimon with her is kosher. Then weiter, the child is not a mamzer. So the child is a kosher child. We just don't know who the father is. It's either Reuven or it's Shimon. But it's not a child that was conceived from a prohibited union. And both of them are chayiv to bring an asham talui. Similar to the case of a chatas is brought when a person does a sin b'shoigig. And asham talui is a carbon that someone brings when you don't know if you did a sin or not. So they don't know. They don't know because you don't know if she was pregnant from Reuven or from Shimon. Mishnah is good, the Mishnah is simple. In other words, bottom line is, in the case of Yibum, wait 90 days. Now here we have a machlokes between Amoraim, which is Itmer. Let's begin learning. That there was stated an argument of Amoraim, hachoylets limu uberes. Simple. A woman becomes a widow and she's pregnant. And therefore, if she's pregnant, at this point, she does not need Yibum. Her husband left a child. Shimon, for whatever reason, did chalitza. And now, vihipila, now she miscarried. So what did we learn in our Mishnah? That retroactively, now that she miscarried, so the chalitza was needed. Question is, do you have to do a new chalitza here or not? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan holds, Eina tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. She does not need chalitza from the brothers. Even though the chalitza was done at a time that apparently chalitza was not needed, she was pregnant. Nevertheless, now that it became that she lost her child, so she's a woman that's standing for Yibum, and now that we retroactively realize that she needs Yibum or chalitza, that chalitza works, and she doesn't need chalitza again from the brothers. Now the Rishonim question the words of Rabbi Yechanan. Why does he speak about from the brothers? Why didn't Rabbi Yechanan just say she doesn't need chalitza, period? Somehow implying, and I don't want to get into this right now for the Daf HaYomi, but there are many Rishonim that hold that everyone agrees that from the man who gave her chalitza, that chalitza did something. The only question between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish is, do the other brothers also have to give chalitza or not? But we will not learn it this way. We're going to learn it simple. All right, that Rabbi Yechanan is saying that the chalitza was good, she doesn't need chalitza. Not even from him, not even from the brothers. He's also one of the brothers. Reish Lakish holds, tziricha chalitza min ha'achim. Even though retroactively she was a woman that was mechuyev to get yibum or chalitza, since when it was done, they thought she doesn't need it, or there was a question mark whether she needs it or not, now she has to get chalitza again. Why? Because chalitzas meuberes shma chalitza. It was unnecessary, but it's called chalitza. Now that you reveal that it is necessary, chalitza was done. And likewise, the Gemara says that just as they argue by chalitza, they argue by yibum. And don't forget, by yibum, it's much worse. And we'll see at the end of today's shir, today's Amud, that people are going to challenge this next statement. And just like they argued by chalitza, so too by yibum, that ubias meuberes shma bia. Same thing. What happens if Reuven dies and his wife Rachel is pregnant, and Shimon does yibum while she's pregnant? Now, at that moment, it appears that he violated the Isur Kares. If she's Meuberes, you don't need Yibum or Chalitza. But later, Vihipila, or she gave birth to Avalat She'ena Shal Kayama, retroactively, she could do Yibum. Was the Yibum a Yibum or not? So the same thing. So Rabbi Yechanan is going to hold that Yibum did Yibum. They're already married. And Reish Lakish says, Tzricha chalitza min ha'achim, because chalitzas meuberes lo yishma chalitza, ubia meuberes lo yishma bia. And Yibum is going to be needed again. Obviously, we'll see right away, the Gemara is going to challenge, each one will challenge the other from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is addressing this case. But before we get to our Mishnah, the Gemara says, B'maiko mifligi, what is the base of their argument? I ba yisei mekra, I ba yisei mesvara. Both, you have both, each one had a pasuk, and each one had a svara. Now normally it says in Pirkei Avos that al rishon rishon, val achran achran. So when the Gemara says, Iba yisei makra, Iba yisei masvara, what should be the first one that the Gemara explains? The first we should give the pasuk, and then the svara, which is why the Bach changes the version. He doesn't change the content, he just changes the order. Instead of reading it from the small letters, we'll read it from the Gemara, but just know that the order is reversed. So Iba yisei masvara, what's the svara? So Rabbi Yechanan says, listen here, Im Yovi Eliyahu, imagine Reuven dies, and Rachel is pregnant, and comes Elijah the prophet, and he says, Eliyahu Navi knows the future, and he says, I'abra mapule mapla, this woman will miscarry. If you were to know that now, so you know that ubein ein la, there's no child, the child will be miscarried. So you know now that she has to have yibum or chalitza. So just like you would agree that in such a case the yibum or the chalitza works, even though we didn't know, Hashem knows. So they shouldn't have done it, but now that it was clarified that what they did was needed, so therefore it works. However, umi lav bar chalitza v'yibum hi, in the case of Eliyahu Hanavi, hashtanami tigale milsa lemafreya. Now it retroactively became clear that that pregnancy was not viable. What does Reish Lakish say? Amar Reish Lakish Amar, that tigale milsa lemafreya lo yamrinan. Ein achanami, if a tzaddik would come and tell you this child will not live, so then you would know. But here you didn't know. Ein ladayin elamasha ein arayis. Right now she's pregnant. Right now you're not allowed to have a relation with her. Right now chalitza is not needed. So even though later it became clear that it is needed, do it again. Rabbi Yechanan says, regarding the mitzvah of Yibum, we had this pasuk before, it says, Ubein ein loi, that when is Yibum done? When there is Ubein ein loi, Amar Achmana, and V'halesle, Ubein ein loi. Bottom line is, she did not have a child, it died. Okay, you didn't know then. You thought she was pregnant, but you thought they might have, but now they don't. Ubein ein loi. Reish Lakish says, we learned this before, that the word ein in Hebrew sometimes is spelled without a yud. Ein, aleph nun. So therefore, every time Hashem spells in the Torah ein, no, with a yud, aleph yud nun, the yud is extra. And we learned before that yud is telling you, instead of just saying ubein ein loy, that he has no son, take the yud and make it into the word ayin, which means ayins, look into it. Look in deeply to make sure there's no son. We learned that before Benegei Mamzer, that if the brother who died had a mamzer with another woman, but he has a son, no mitzvah of yibum. It's only when there's mamish no son that ben ein loy means ayin olav, says Reish Lakish. And here, what are you looking at? You are looking into her, and what are you seeing? You're seeing that she's pregnant. So at this moment, there is no mitzvah of yibum. You looked into it and you saw that she is pregnant. So that's the machlekes. Now, Eisvei Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Let's begin back and forth. Rabbi Yechanan is asking on a shlokish that says that the chalitza that is done when you thought that it was not needed is b'chlal not a chalitza from our Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah? That ein havlat shel kayama, that if the child did not live, which means that the chalitza that was done, l'chayra, is a chalitza, right? And therefore the dinim are that who also he cannot marry achayitz chalutzase, and he and she midrabanan cannot marry his relatives, and she's puzzled from kahuna. That was the case of our Mishnah. You didn't wait 3 months. When you did chalitza, no one knew if it's needed or not. Later it became revealed that chalitza was needed. So therefore the chalitza is a chalitza with all of the consequences. So says Rabbi Yechanan, Bishlem Elididi, that works exactly to me. The amina that I hold, chalitzas me'uberes shma chalitza, that if chalitza is done on a pregnant woman who later loses the child, which means the chalitza was needed, right? Ein avlat shel kayama, the chalitza is a chalitza mishum hachi pisala. That's why she becomes a chalutza. El lididach, but according to your Reish Lakish, that you say that if chalitza is done on a me'oberes, since when it was done, it apparently was not needed. That is not considered an act of chalitza. Then amai psala min kohuna. Then she should not be puzzled from kohuna. She's not a chalutza yet. Says the Gemara, you're right. Says Reish Lakish. Enachanami. I am right. Midoraisa, the chalitza was not good, and it needs to be done again. Why does the Mishnah say that he cannot marry her relatives, she cannot marry his relatives? That's a chumrah. That's umid rabbanon and ulu chumrah ba'alma. People don't know these things. You know what people see? She got chalitza. So we don't want people to think that even after a woman gets chalitza, she can marry a kohen. Right, which would be the case according to Reish Lakish midoraisa. That means if she would not have a child, according to Reish Lakish, she needs chalitza again. What would happen if the only living brother, Shimon, dies? Now she's free to marry. Can she marry a kohen? So Reish Lakish says, theoretically, yes, only midrabanan not. Now let's go reverse. Ikadamri, other people hold that actually it was Reish Lakish that asked on Rabbi Yechanan, based on the same logic. It says in the Mishnah that ein avlat shel kayama, that if chalitza was done before you waited the 90 days, and it turned out later that there was no child, so the Mishnah says, so the chalitza was a chalitza, who asr b'krei sell, and she cannot marry his relatives, and she becomes puzzled from Kahuna. So now comes along Reish Lakish. Look how he turns it to faker. Bishlem elididi, according to me, that I hold a chalitzas me'oberes lo yishma chalitza. And really, all the Mishnah is telling you is a chumrah, hainu diktani psulam akona, which is l'chumrah. But the Mishnah doesn't go on and say that she doesn't eat chalitza min ha'achim, because according to Reish Lakish, she cannot marry a kohen. But she will need another chalitza from one of the brothers. Let's learn according to Rashi from any of the brothers, from the same one that gave it before, or from another one. The Mishnah, in other words, the Mishnah doesn't have to say the biggest chiddush, she no longer needs chalitza. The Mishnah doesn't say it because she needs chalitza. But according to you, why didn't the Mishnah tell you that not only is she pasal min hakahuna, the Mishnah should have said a bigger chiddush, that she doesn't even need to get chalitza again. So Rabbi Yechanan tells Reish Lakish, the Mishnah doesn't need to say it because it's automatically understood. When the Mishnah is telling you that she's pasal from kahuna, why is she pasal from kahuna? Because she's a chalutza, which means she doesn't need chalitza again. Einochanami. And va'aida, the Tani Reisha, since in the first case in the Mishnah, when we spoke about that the Vlad was kayama, the Mishnah was emphasizing the words loy pasla, that she's not disqualified from a kohen, right? Because if the Vlad was shel kayama, then the act of chalitza was nothing. It was a terrible thing that had it was an act of nothing, and now she could marry a kohen. So the Mishnah and the Sefer learned that she is pasal from kohuna. No, it's to make it symmetric between the Reish and the Sefer. We emphasized, is she or she not qualified to be with a kohen? But enachanami, according to Rabbi Yechanan, she will not even need another chalitza. Now, Eisvei Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, Weiter from our Mishnah, it says, Ein havlat shel kayomon. Let's speak about Yibum. What's the second case of the Mishnah? That if Shimon did Yibum, he didn't wait 90 days. And later he discovers that even though she was pregnant, the baby died. The baby died, she needed to get Yibum or Chalitza, which means the act that he did was an act, Yikayim, he can keep her. So says Rabbi Yechanan, according to me, that I hold Chalitzas Me'oberes Shma Chalitza, and therefore I hold that a relation with a Me'oberes is called a relation if it turns out that she did not have a child that was a viable child. That's why the Mishnah only says the words, he can stay on to be with her. Because the act of Yibum already did the marriage. And now the question is, can they be together or not? But according to you, you say that Chalitza has to be redone, which means according to you, Reish Lakish, if a man does Yibum with the Yevama before he waited 90 days, even if it turns out that it was okay to marry her, but he has to do another act of Yibum, then the Mishnah shouldn't have said the words Yikayim. The Mishnah have says, you got to do it again. You have to marry her again. And be a Maberes Loishma Bia, Yachzer v'yivol v'yikayim ibayalei. So the Gemara says that's exactly what the Mishnah means. Answers the Gemara. When the Mishnah says that they can be together, my yikayim, what does it mean he can be together? He can be together. According to Reish Lakish, he has to do another act of bia, bikavana, that this should be the yibum. That my yikayim means yachzer v'yivol v'yikayim, because the leisagi, because it's not good without it. Ikadi Amri, another version in the back and forth, which will be more or less the same. That Eisvei, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yechanan, that it was Reish Lakish, that Rabbi Yechanan fakert, says in the Mishnah regarding if a person did Yibum before he should have, and later if it turns out that the child was not viable, which means she was really up for Yibum, so the Mishnah says Yekayim. So comes along now Reish Lakish and he says, Bishlem elididi, according to me, that I hold Chalitzas Moberes, Loi Shema Chalitza, that I hold that a relation with a Moberes is not called a Bia, it's not kosher. Hainu diktani Yekayim, and the Mishnah that says Yekayim means Yachzer v'yivol v'yekayim. It means that he has to have another act of a relation with her, l'sheim yibum, because the loisagi b'lafachi, because without that other act, what they did before, according to Reish Lakish, is not worth anything. But according to you, what do you hold? Who was you, Rabbi Yechanan? You hold that the act of yibum was a full-fledged act. They are married. So now, the Mishnah should have said a bigger chiddush, that they are already married. And therefore, if he wants, he can keep her. And if he wants, he has to give her a get. Because according to Rabbi Yechanan, they're already married. According to the Reish Lakish, they're not married. So the question is not, does he have to give her a get or not? The Mishnah is telling you, you can now do Yibum if you want to. And if you don't want to do Yibum, don't do anything. Do Chalitza. According to Rabbi Yechanan, there's no option of Chalitza. So the Mishnah should have emphasized the bigger Chiddush, that what they did was mamish done. And if he doesn't want to be with her, he has to give her a get. So the Gemara says again, Enochinami. Yeah, if he doesn't want to be with her, he has to give her a get. Why didn't the Mishnah say the greater Chiddush to be symmetric? Either the Tani Reisha Yoitzi, Tani Nami Sefer Yekayim. Okay, so far, neither of them proved anything from the Mishnah. The problem will begin, and we'll start this now, and Amir Tzashem will continue this in tomorrow's daf, that we found a Braisa that's going to challenge, I think, Rabbi Yechanan. Meisvei, the question is from a Braisa. And what's the question? There it says, if a man marries his Yevama, and he discovers later that she's pregnant, if she's pregnant, then there's no mitzvah of Yibum. If there's no mitzvah of Yibum, then she's the erva of your brother's wife. It says, Harei zu loy sinasei sarasa. Look at this. He is not allowed to marry her co-wife. He's not allowed to marry her co-wife, Shema Yehei Vlad ben Kayama. These words Pasha don't make sense because maybe the child will be viable. Now 1 second. If the child is viable, then what? Then the co-wife, just like this woman, is an erva of Eishes Ach. So the Gemara says, Adarabba, if the child is viable, now they can't marry. The co-wife doesn't need anything, because there's no need of Yibam and Chalitza, because the deceased brother left children. Ella, you have to change the version and say, Shema lo yehi Vlad ben Kayama, that maybe the child will not be viable. If the child is not viable, then what? Then Yibum and Chalitza are needed. Now 1 second, if you're going to hold, if you hold like Rabbi Yechanan, it's cashing against Rabbi Yechanan, that means that when he did the act of relation with one wife, if later we're going to find out that it was needed, it's already good, so why can't the co-wife marry out? Let her marry out. The mitzvah of Yibum or Chalitza is only with one of the widows. Since he did Yibum with one, that already freed the other. So tipater b'biyah shel chaverta. Why does the Mishnah say? Why does the Braisa say that the tzara cannot marry out? She should be allowed to marry out. And this question was such a big question that made Abaya modify the argument between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Don't forget, they were arguing by Chalitza. And then the Gemara automatically said that whatever they say by Chalitza goes to Yibum. So now the Gemara changes that. So Amar Abaya, everyone agrees that if there was an act of Yibum when you thought you were not allowed to have that act of Yibum, even Rabbi Yechanan holds that act is not a good act. Which is why the Braisa says that the co-wife is not free to marry out. Because maybe the child would not be viable. If the child is not viable, then they need Yibum and Chalitza. And what happened was nothing yet. They only argued by Chalitza, that Rabbi Yechanan holds Chalitza's Moberes Shma Chalitza, Bia Moberes, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, Lo Shma Bia. As Tosfos explains, Chalitza, if it's not needed, is not a prohibited act. Yibum, if Yibum was not needed, then Yibum is a Isur. So you're doing something that's essentially wrong. That's why even Rabbi Yechanan will agree, according to Abaya, that it doesn't have any effect. However, Reish Lakish holds, it's the same thing. Bia mioberes lo shma bia, and v'chalitzas mioberes lo shma chalitza. Comes along Rava, and Rava disagrees with Abaya. Rava says it has to go hand in hand. Amalei Rava manavshach. We say mi manavshach. I bia mioberes shma bia, then chalitza mioberes shma chalitza. V'i bia mioberes lo shma bia, then chalitza lo shma chalitza. And I will continue the share tomorrow. But the point is that Rava is going to argue with Abayi's differentiation, and now Rava is going to have to explain the Braisa that says that if a person does Yibum to one wife, the other wife cannot marry out. Why can't she not marry out? The Braisa says the words because maybe Yibum is needed. If Yibum is needed, then if Yibum is needed, because the blood ben Kayama, maybe the blood will be She'ena ben Kayama. If the blood is She'ena ben Kayama, then she will need Yibum. This implies that what he did is not done yet. According to Rabbi Yechanan, she should be a mount, because the act is an act. So it's a kasha against Rabbi Yechanan, who will answer this, God willing, tomorrow.